The vast expanse of space held countless stories, but none quite like the one that unfolded on that fateful night aboard the stellar cruiser Avalon. Through the gleaming corridors of the diplomatic vessel, red emergency lights pulsed in rhythm with blaring alarms. The ship shuddered violently as another explosion rocked its hull. Princess Lyra of the Celestial Empire stumbled against the metallic wall, her iridescent robes tangling around her legs. Her silvery skin glistened with perspiration, and her violet eyes widened in terror as the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from round the corner. The boarding party was getting closer. She'd never imagined her first diplomatic mission would end like this. Pirates, ruthless mercenaries hired by those opposing the peace treaty between humans and her people, had ambushed their ship in neutral space. Her royal guards had fallen one by one, buying her precious time to escape, but now she was alone and cornered. Just as hope began to fade, a firm hand grasped her shoulder. She spun around, ready to fight, only to find herself face to face with a human wearing the distinctive dark blue uniform of the Earth Defense Force. His determined brown eyes met hers, and despite the chaos around them, she felt an unexpected sense of calm. "Staff Sergeant Chris Thompson, Your Highness," he said quickly, checking his rifle's ammunition. "I'm here to get you out." His voice carried an unwavering certainty that made her want to believe everything would be okay. Before she could respond, the corridor erupted in plasma fire. Chris pushed her behind him, returning fire with practiced precision. "Stay close," he commanded, leading her through a maintenance shaft she hadn't even noticed. His movements were fluid and confident, each step calculated despite the growing danger. As they navigated through the bowels of the ship, Lyra couldn't help but study her unlikely protector. She'd heard stories about human soldiers, their resourcefulness, their determination, their almost illogical bravery. But seeing it firsthand was different. Here was a member of a species her advisors had once dismissed as primitive, risking his life to save her without hesitation. The ship's AI crackled through damaged speakers. "Warning. Hull breach on decks 3 through 5. Life support systems critical. Evacuation protocols initiated." Chris led them into a small cargo bay, quickly scanning the room before securing the door. "The escape pods are one level up," he explained, checking a holographic display on his wrist. "We can make it, but—" He paused, his expression grim. "The main corridor is crawling with hostiles." Lyra's heart raced as she processed their situation. "There has to be another way," she whispered, fighting to keep her voice steady. The weight of everything. The attack, the lives lost, the peace treaty hanging by a thread, crashed over her. A tear rolled down her cheek, leaving a gleaming trail on her silvery skin. Chris turned to her, his features softening for a moment. "Hey," he said gently, "I made a promise to get you out of here, and I intend to keep it." He reached into his tactical vest and pulled out what looked like a small metal sphere. Sometimes the best path isn't the obvious one. The ship groaned ominously around them as structural integrity continued to fail. Through the small viewport, Lyra could see escape pods launching into space, streaking away from the dying vessel like shooting stars. Time was running out, and their options were dwindling by the second. Chris studied the sphere in his hand, a slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Your Highness," he said, "how do you feel about making our own exit?" Before Lyra could respond, a deafening explosion rocked the adjacent corridor. The metal sphere in Chris's hand hummed to life, emitting a soft blue glow. "EMP disruptor," he explained quickly. "Should give us a small window of opportunity. But first," he pulled out a compact emergency beacon from his vest and pressed it into her hand. "If anything happens to me, this will lead our rescue teams straight to you." Lyra clutched the beacon, her delicate fingers trembling. She wanted to protest, to insist they find another way, but years of diplomatic training had taught her to recognize when someone had already made up their mind. The determination in Chris's eyes reminded her of her father's royal guards, that same unwavering commitment to duty. "The pirates are using neural-linked weapons," Chris continued, checking the corridor through a small gap in the doorway. "This disruptor will scramble their targeting systems, but only for about 30 seconds. That's our window to reach the emergency shaft that leads directly to the escape pod bay." Another explosion shook the ship, closer this time. Through the chaos, Lyra could hear the pirates' heavy footsteps and their growled commands in various alien languages. They were methodically searching every room, and it wouldn't be long before they reached this cargo bay. As Chris prepared the disruptor, Lyra's mind wandered to just hours earlier, when she'd been practicing her speech for the peace summit. The treaty between humans and the Celestial Empire was supposed to change everything, end centuries of misunderstanding, and open up new possibilities for both their peoples. Now those dreams of peace were literally exploding around her. "Your Highness," Chris's voice pulled her back to reality. "There's something you should know." He hesitated, checking his wrist display again. "This attack, it's too well coordinated. They knew exactly when and where to hit us. Someone on the inside must have leaked your travel plans." The revelation hit Lyra like a blast of cold space. A traitor? Among her own people? She'd known there were those who opposed the treaty, but to go this far, who would do such a thing? She whispered, more to herself than to Chris. "That's a mystery for another time," Chris replied, his voice hardening as he readied his rifle. "Right now, we need to focus on getting you to safety. The future of both our peoples might depend on it." The ship's eye spoke again, its voice now distorted and breaking up. "Warning. Multiple hull breaches. Estimated time to critical failure, 15 minutes. Chris gripped the disruptor tighter, his knuckles white against the metal sphere. "When I activate this, we'll have exactly 30 seconds. The shaft entrance is 40 meters down the corridor. We'll need to sprint, and we can't stop for anything. Do you understand?" Lyra straightened her spine, channeling generations of royal dignity. "I understand, Sergeant Thompson." She gathered her robes, preparing to run. "And thank you, not just for this, but for showing me that my faith in human courage wasn't misplaced." A ghost of a smile crossed Chris's face, but before he could respond, heavy impacts against the cargo bay door made them both jump. The pirates had found them. Chris positioned himself between Lyra and the door, his finger hovering over the disruptor's activation switch. "Whatever happens next," he said, his voice steady despite the growing chaos, "stay right behind me. And Your Highness," he glanced back at her one last time, "when we get through this, I'd like to hear that speech you were planning to give at the summit." The cargo bay door groaned under the assault, its reinforced metal beginning to buckle. Time had run out. Chris took a deep breath, and Lyra could see him mentally counting down. 3, 2, 1. Chris activated the disruptor, and a wave of electromagnetic energy pulsed through the corridor. The pirates' neural-linked weapons sputtered and died, accompanied by shouts of confusion and anger. "Now," Chris commanded, kicking open the cargo bay door and pulling Lyra into a sprint. The corridor became a blur of emergency lights and chaos. Behind them, the pirates struggled with their malfunctioning weapons, some resorting to throwing them aside in frustration. Lyra's heart pounded as she ran, her royal robes billowing behind her. Chris moved with practiced efficiency, his rifle at the ready as he guided them through the maze of fallen debris. 20 seconds left. A piece of the ceiling crashed down just meters ahead of them. Chris didn't hesitate. He slid under it, then helped Lyra through the narrow gap. The ship's structure was failing faster than expected, and the groaning of stressed metal filled the air with an ominous symphony. 15 seconds. The corridor split into two paths. Chris pulled them left, just as a massive explosion ripped through the right passageway. The heat singed the edges of Lyra's robes, but they kept running. She could hear the pirates regaining ground behind them, their weapons slowly coming back online. 10 seconds. The emergency shaft was in sight, its access panel glowing faintly in the darkness. But between them and safety stood 3 more pirates who had circled around. These ones armed with old-fashioned projectile weapons unaffected by the EMP. Chris shoved Lyra behind a support beam just as bullets sprayed the corridor. 5 seconds. "When I say run, head straight for that panel," Chris whispered, pulling something from his vest. "Don't stop, don't look back." Before Lyra could protest, he emerged from cover, drawing the pirates' fire. The distraction worked. They focused on him, forgetting about her for a crucial moment. The EMP's effects were wearing off. The pirates behind them had regained control of their weapons, their heavy footsteps growing closer. Chris threw what looked like a flash grenade, but instead of an explosion, it released a dense cloud of smoke. "Run!" he shouted, laying down covering fire. Lyra sprinted toward the access panel, her fingers frantically working the emergency release as bullets whizzed past. The panel finally gave way, revealing the narrow maintenance shaft beyond. She turned back to call for Chris, only to see him locked in close combat with one of the pirates. His rifle had been knocked aside, and he was fighting with desperate intensity. The ship shuddered violently, and a computerized voice announced, "Critical system failure imminent. 5 minutes until core breach." The corridor's lights flickered ominously, casting strange shadows through the smoke. More pirates were emerging from both directions, their weapons humming with restored power. Chris managed to overpower his opponent, but took a glancing hit to his shoulder in the process. He staggered, catching himself against the wall. Blood seeped through his uniform, but his eyes remained focused and determined. "Get in the shaft," he yelled to Lyra, drawing his sidearm. Lyra stood frozen in the shaft's entrance, torn between duty and compassion. The diplomatic part of her knew she should go. The treaty, the peace between their peoples, everything depended on her survival. But watching this human warrior risk everything for her, she couldn't bring herself to leave him behind. The pirates were closing in from both sides now. Chris had positioned himself in the corridor, becoming a human barrier between them and Lyra. His injured arm hung at his side, but his weapon remained steady in his other hand. Through the smoke and chaos, their eyes met for a brief moment. In that look, Lyra saw something that made her heart skip, not just duty or professional obligation, but a deeper, more personal resolve. The ship's hull screamed under the mounting pressure, and suddenly the entire section began to tilt. They were running out of time, options, and hope. The next few seconds would determine not just their fate, but possibly the future of human-alien relations. And in that crucial moment, Lyra made a decision that would change everything. Just as Lyra stepped out of the maintenance shaft to help Chris, the ship's emergency containment protocols activated. Heavy blast doors began descending throughout the corridor, threatening to seal them in separate sections. The pirates scattered, realizing they were about to be trapped, but their leader, a scared creature with cybernetic enhancements, rushed forward with reckless determination. "The princess doesn't leave this ship alive," the leader snarled in broken English, revealing something far more sinister than a simple pirate raid. He pulled out a device that made Chris's eyes widen in recognition. It was a void bomb, illegal technology capable of creating a localized rupture in space-time. One detonation would not only kill them, but could tear apart half the ship instantly. Chris dove forward, tackling the pirate leader just as he activated the bomb's countdown. They crashed into a pile of debris, wrestling for control of the deadly device. Lyra didn't hesitate. She ran to help, her diplomatic training forgotten as survival instincts took over. She grabbed a fallen pipe, swinging it at another pirate, who tried to intervene. "Your Highness, get back," Chris shouted, still grappling with the leader. But his warning came too late. The ship lurched violently, and a massive hull breach erupted behind them. The vacuum of space began pulling at everything not bolted down. Emergency force fields flickered to life, but they were unstable, their blue energy crackling erratically. The pirate leader laughed maniacally, his cybernetic eye glowing red. "You don't understand, do you?" he spat, still clutching the void bomb. "This was never about stopping a peace treaty. Your death was meant to start a war. The Celestial Empire would never believe humans didn't plan this." Lyra froze, the revelation hitting her harder than the ship's deteriorating artificial gravity. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was a calculated plot to spark an interstellar conflict. But who would benefit from such chaos? The answer came to her in a horrifying flash. The Shadow Consortium, a powerful group that had grown rich from centuries of human-alien tensions. The countdown on the void bomb reached 30 seconds. Chris, still fighting despite his injured shoulder, managed to slam the pirate leader against a wall. But the impact caused him to lose his grip on the device. It skittered across the tilting floor, stopping precariously at the edge of the force field's protection. "Chris," Lyra called out, pointing to a familiar symbol on the pirate leader's neck, a mark she'd seen before in classified diplomatic files. "He's not working for who we thought. This goes all the way to thee." Her words were cut short by an explosion from above. The ceiling gave way, sending a cascade of debris between them. Chris dove one way, Lyra the other, and the pirate leader scrambled toward the void bomb with desperate purpose. The ship's voice, now barely audible over the chaos, announced, "Core containment failing. Total structural collapse in 2 minutes." Through gaps in the falling debris, Lyra could see Chris trying to reach her, but with his injury, the unstable gravity, and the continuing assault from the remaining pirates, he was quickly becoming overwhelmed. The blast doors were nearly closed, the force fields were failing, and the void bomb's countdown kept ticking away. In that moment, Lyra realized she had access to an ability she'd been forbidden to reveal, a genetic gift passed down through the royal bloodline. Using it would expose secrets her people had kept for generations, but watching Chris fight against impossible odds to save her, she knew some secrets weren't worth dying to protect. As her hands began to glow with ancestral power, the pirate leader noticed and shouted in genuine fear, "No." The legends were true. But before Lyra could act, a new sound cut through the chaos, the distinct hum of quantum engines. Through the breach in the hull, she glimpsed multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace. Their design was unlike anything she'd seen before, and they were heading straight for the Avalon. Lyra's ancestral power surged through her body, emanating waves of iridescent energy that temporarily stabilized the failing force fields. The pirates stared in awe as she lifted her hands, creating a protective barrier around herself and Chris. For centuries, her people had hidden their true abilities, letting the galaxy believe they were merely diplomatic figureheads. Now that deception was ending. The gift was never meant for war, she declared, her voice carrying an otherworldly resonance. It was meant to protect, to heal, to bring peace. With careful concentration, she extended her power toward Chris, and he watched in amazement as the energy knitted his wounded shoulder back together. The mysterious ships outside suddenly fired, not at the Avalon, but at the approaching pirate reinforcements that had just emerged from hyperspace. Through the hull breach, they could see the ship's markings, a joint task force of human and celestial empire special forces. They had been tracking the Shadow Consortium all along. The pirate leader, still clutching the void bomb, laughed bitterly. "You think this changes anything? Once the Consortium learns of your power, they'll never stop hunting you. The war will come one way or another." He pressed the bomb's final activation sequence, but at that exact moment, Chris tackled him again. This time, something was different. Enhanced by Lyra's energy, Chris moved with incredible speed and precision. The pirate leader's cybernetic enhancements sparked and failed, overloaded by the residual power. The void bomb flew from his grasp, tumbling toward the weakening force field. Time seemed to slow as Lyra reached out with her power, trying to contain the bomb's detonation. But she had never attempted anything on this scale before. "I can't hold it much longer," she warned, sweat beading on her silvery skin. The bomb's countdown reached 5 seconds. Chris rushed to her side, and without hesitation, placed his hands over hers. "Together," he said firmly. Something extraordinary happened. Their energies merged, human determination amplifying ancient celestial power. The void bomb froze in midair, suspended in a cocoon of swirling energy. The joint task force breached the ship, led by a towering celestial royal guard and a human special operations commander. They secured the surviving pirates, but stopped short at the sight before them. A human and a celestial princess, working in perfect harmony to contain a weapon that could have started a war. With the last of their combined strength, Lyra and Chris guided the bomb through the hull breach. The task force ships projected a containment field, and at the exact moment the bomb detonated, it was safely isolated in the vacuum of space. The resulting implosion created a spectacular display of light and energy, but harmed nothing. As emergency teams rushed to stabilize the Avalon, the pirate leader was led away in restraints, but his final words echoed ominously. You've revealed your hand too soon, Princess. The game is just beginning. Lyra turned to Chris, who looked at her with a mix of awe and understanding. I guess we both had our secrets, he said with a slight smile. Your Highness, I. She stopped him with a gentle gesture. After what we've been through, I think you can call me Lyra. Their eyes met, and in that moment, both knew that everything had changed. The treaty they had fought to protect would now mean something far different, not just peace between their peoples, but the beginning of a true partnership. The human commander approached them, his expression grave. We've decoded transmissions from the Shadow Consortium, he reported. This attack was just a test. They're planning something bigger across multiple systems. Lyra straightened her shoulders, every inch the royal leader despite her tattered robes. Then we'll face it together, she declared, glancing at Chris. It's time both our peoples knew the full truth about everything. As medical teams treated the wounded and engineers worked to save the ship, Lyra and Chris stood at a viewport, watching the stars. The galaxy was changing, secrets were unraveling, and new threats loomed on the horizon. But for now, they had won something precious, a moment of genuine understanding between their worlds, bought with trust, sacrifice, and the courage to reveal one's true self. The pirate leader's last words still hung in the air, a reminder that their story was far from over. As if reading her thoughts, Chris turned to Lyra. Whatever comes next, he said quietly, I've got your back, your high, Lyra. She smiled, her violet eyes reflecting the starlight. I know, she replied, and that's exactly what they're afraid of. In the days following the attack, the Avalon limped back to Earth under escort from the Joint Task Force. The ship's corridors, still bearing scars from the battle, buzzed with activity as human and celestial engineers worked side by side on repairs. Each shared technique became a small victory for cooperation, each solved problem a step toward true understanding. Lyra stood in the ship's observation deck, watching Earth grow larger in the viewport. The blue planet, so different from her crystalline homeworld, held a beauty she was only beginning to appreciate. Behind her, the door slid open, and Chris's familiar footsteps approached. The interrogations are complete, he reported, coming to stand beside her. His uniform was now adorned with a special insignia, marking him as one of the few humans trusted with knowledge of the Celestials' true nature. The Shadow Consortium's network runs deeper than we thought. They have infiltrators in both our governments. Lyra nodded, her expression thoughtful. My father has called an emergency session of the Imperial Council. After seeing how our powers worked in harmony with human strength, even the most conservative members can't deny the potential of our alliance. She turned to face Chris, her violet eyes meeting his. They're creating a new joint task force, the first of its kind. Let me guess, Chris smiled. They need volunteers who already have experience working together. The fresh scar on his shoulder was barely visible now, a reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. But it had also become a symbol of what they'd gained, trust that transcended species and duty. Through the viewport, they could see the diplomatic fleet arriving to escort them the rest of the way, sleek celestial ships flying alongside human vessels, a sight that would have seemed impossible just days ago. The Shadow Consortium had tried to prevent this unity, but they had only succeeded in making it stronger. The peace summit will proceed as planned. Lyra continued, but with a few adjustments to the treaty. No more hiding, no more half-truths. If we're to face what's coming, we need to trust each other completely. She smiled slightly. My speech might need some revisions. About that speech, Chris said, pulling something from his pocket, the emergency beacon he'd given her during their escape. You dropped this in the chaos, but I held onto it just in case we ever need it again. He placed it in her hand, their fingers brushing momentarily. Partners watch out for each other. Lyra clutched the beacon, feeling its weight, not just as a piece of technology, but as a symbol of the trust they'd built. The consortium doesn't understand, she said softly. They think revealing our abilities made us vulnerable, but they're wrong. Sharing our true selves, trusting each other, that's what makes us stronger. As Earth's atmospheric defense platforms came into view, a priority transmission arrived from both their commanding officers. New intelligence suggested the consortium was regrouping, gathering resources for whatever they had planned next. But this time, they wouldn't be facing divided opponents. This time, humanity and the Celestial Empire would stand together. "Well, partner," Chris said, straightening his uniform, ready to make some history. Lyra's response was interrupted by the ship's eye announcing their approach to Earth's orbital dock. Soon, they would face press conferences, debriefings, and the monumental task of reshaping relations between their peoples. The road ahead would be challenging, full of obstacles, and those who refused to accept change. But as they watched Earth's sunrise paint the stars in brilliant colors, Lyra felt something she hadn't experienced since before the attack: hope, not just for peace, but for something greater, a future where trust overcame fear, where differences became strengths, and where an unlikely partnership could change the course of two civilizations. "Ready," she answered, standing tall as the princess she was born to be and the leader she had become. The galaxy was changing, and they would face it together, one human soldier and one alien princess, proving that the strongest bonds are forged in the most unexpected moments.